Not cut out for heroics. Written by Ended Flames. Read by Cole. Chapter 26. Sports Festival begin! Now for the athlete's oath, Midnight yelled, cracking a whip as she sauntered onto the stage. Izuku could hear mutters and mumbles from the crowd about whether this was actually appropriate, but Izuku thought it was much better than before she changed her costume. Same aesthetic, a little less possibly traumatizing for a bunch of teenagers. Be quiet! Your class representative is Ichiro Kirishima from 1A! It's Kiri? Izuku asked quietly, a little confused as Kirishima made his way onto the stage. Izuku could see the nervous look on his friend's face, though it was quickly disguised with a smile as he stood in front of the microphone. Well, I didn't expect to be doing this, and, I don't know the athlete's oath, so just do your best, everyone. You're super manly. Kirishima spoke into the microphone, giving the crowd an awkward fist pump. Shinso face-palmed next to Izuku, who cheered for his friend despite the awkwardness of the sports speech. It was clear that Kirishima hadn't known what to say when he went up onto the podium, and was about now making a beeline for Izuku and Shinso. Now he was out of the direct eye of the crowd, who were now listening to Midnight stalling for the first event. This! Midnight yelled, catching the attention of the crowd again and pointing to the large roulette wheel on the screen behind her, which landed on the same time an obstacle course race. The crowds lining the stadium cheered as Midnight began to explain the event. They'd just have to go around the outside of the stadium, avoiding the obstacles. That wouldn't be anything easy if UA had set it up. Izuku elbowed Shinso's side as a door in the side of the stadium opened up, revealing a tunnel. That was the first obstacle. Everyone would rush for it and end up being squashed, just like the corridors when the press invaded. You have a plan? Shinso asked. Of course, Izuku smiled. If you carried me and then used your quirk on some people, you could make them clear a path for us, or even carry us through. Racers, to your positions! Midnight called. Everyone rushed forward. Everyone trying to get in the front as they lined up. Shinso nodded to Izuku. The plan was undefined and very quickly put together, but it was the best they had. Izuku nodded back and Shinso crouched down, allowing the shorter to jump onto his back in a piggyback style. Izuku clutched his friend's shoulders and looked forward in determination. Here we go. Start! They were off. Shinso ran through the crowd, carrying Izuku until they got into the tunnel, where everyone got stuck just as the boy had predicted. Shinso! Do it now! Izuku whispered, so no one would catch on to their plan. Shinso nodded, quickly thinking of anything he could say that would get a response. Are we all gonna do our best? Shinso yelled after a second, earning a range of responses from yeah to plus ultra and of course, dumbass! That was all he needed. Anyone who did respond, mostly just people close to them who worked fine, were now under Shinso's control. Lift us up and get us out of this tunnel. And so they did. It turned out to be a good decision on Shinzo's part to have the crowd lift them as well as shoving past the others, because only a few moments later the ground had frozen, getting everyone on the ground without a good counter for the ice stuck. Though that included everyone Shinzo had brainwashed. It now meant they could get through a lot easier, especially Izuku, who scrambled to the ground and pushed through everyone before using the ice and his roller skate to his advantage. "Sorry, Shinzo, you got this!" It only took a few seconds for the jets being powered up for Izuku to gather enough momentum to pass most of the others and begin catching up to Todoroki. "Hey, Todoroki!" Izuku yelled, quickly catching up with the ice user, who barely acknowledged him as they turned the corner, and Izuku had to power up the jets yet again as the ice ran out to turn and catch back up. "What was that for?" "Have to prove I can do this," Todoroki said, stopping as they got to the next obstacle. Izuku had to spin in a circle to stop himself from crashing as they stood in front of an army of giant robots. "What the heck? Can they really stand a chance against our Robo-Infernos?" Mike announced the obstacle in front of them over the loudspeaker. Izuku looked over his shoulder, surprised at how many others had already escaped the ice before turning back to Todoroki. "This must be what they used in the hero examination," Todoroki muttered. "Obviously they went through a lot of trouble, but I wish they'd prepared something a little more difficult." Izuku saw his friend preparing a massive attack. His right hand was steaming from the cold, and only just managed to scramble backwards as a wave of ice enveloped the robot that was now leaning for them. "Todoroki!" Izuku yelled as his friend ran off, leaving the robot creaking dangerously. A lot of other students ran for the opening that Todoroki had left, but Izuku skated back the way he came. He knew it was going to fall. Todoroki had left it like that on purpose. As the robot crashed down on top of Kirishima and Tetsu, who Izuku knew would be fine since their quirks were basically identical, Izuku wasted no time racing forward. He'd lost enough time from Todoroki's move just now. On his way, he grabbed a sheet of metal that had been lying on the ground from the robot. It would be good to have a shield just in case. It might come in handy. It did come in handy only moments later, when a smaller robot started chasing him. He managed to swing the metal and damage it enough to stop it and keep going as the other giant robots in the way were taken down by Yaoyorozu, who had made a cannon. Surely that took a lot out of her. But he couldn't dwell on that now. He had to keep going. The second obstacle couldn't be that much harder, right? Wrong. For the second obstacle, they'll have to get creative. It's the fall. When Izuku arrived at the giant pit, there were already people making their way along the ropes. Asui, too, she had reached it halfway across using her quirk to move quickly. Todoroki was still in the lead, freezing the ropes as he glided across them, at the same time making it difficult for anyone else to follow his path, and Mei Hatsume using a grappling hook-like support gear to fling herself across as would be expected. She was using this whole thing as an advertisement campaign after all. Izuku looked around for anything that could help him get across quickly. He saw Shinzo in the crowd. Good, he made it too. But he wouldn't be much help here, nor would Kirishima. He was about to give up and just shimmy along the ropes when he was tapped on the shoulder. He turned to see Monoma. Come with me, Monoma commanded, and Izuku gave him a confused look before shifting his gaze to the solid plate of, was that air, under his arm. He must have copied Tsugubara's quirk. The blonde scoffed at Izuku's hesitation. Do you want to win or not? Yeah, okay. Izuku nodded, following Monoma, who led him out of the way a little after Izuku had tied the hunk of scrap metal that he'd insisted on keeping to his back. He was glad it wasn't too heavy. They began to move across the canyon, using the platforms of air as stepping stones. Izuku had almost fallen once. Roller skates weren't really the best for jumping onto small platforms, but Monoma had grabbed his wrist just in time, and afterwards he'd managed to get the hang of it. Izuku was glad for his friend's help. He knew most of Class 1B had a strategy in place. Hang back so you're not a target, and they won't know your quirks. So Monoma hadn't needed to help him, and this could be putting them both in the top 10 if it worked well. It worked spectacularly well. They managed to get ahead of almost everyone. With some exceptions, they'd ended up in around 10th place by the time they'd reached the other side of the canyon. Monoma was panting. Izuku guessed the lack of air was a side effect of Tsugubara's quirk, but the blonde had insisted that Izuku go on without him while he recovered. After another moment of hesitation on Izuku's part, he realized that Todoroki was already halfway across the minefield. He had a huge lead, and more people were completing the last obstacle and making their way onto the minefield as well. He saw Shinzo almost across the canyon and stood up. Okay, good luck, Monoma. Izuku smiled, grabbing the bit of scrap metal and running towards the edge of the mines and looking around. Everyone had been a lot more careful at the start, so there were a lot more mines. They weren't that powerful, more of a hindrance to stop people or slow them down, but for a lot at once? Yeah, that might work. And since everyone had to go slowly, including Todoroki if he didn't want to make it easier for everyone else by creating an ice path, he'd have time to do this. Izuku smiled a determined smile as he began digging up the mines, getting odd looks from everyone, including Monoma as they rushed past him, as much as they could in a minefield. As he dug them up, he began making a careful pile, making sure they'd all detonate when he slammed the metal plate onto them. Once Izuku had a pile that he deemed big enough, he tied the wires sticking out from the plate around his wrist and rolled back a little, powering up his chest and giving himself momentum as he flung himself onto the pile. There was a brief moment of silence before the bright flash and the loud sounds of many explosions at once. Izuku screwed his eyes shut, flinching as each went off before he was thrown into the air. He could feel the wind wrecking his hair back. He peeked out of one eye, the sight making him widen them in surprise. He was flying over the minefield. It worked! Then he began to descend, losing momentum as the ground got closer. Todoroki had reached the end of the minefield and was taking a moment to breathe before preparing to run again. Izuku realized he would just about make it to where Todoroki was standing. That's why he did something that would probably be considered stupid. Izuku untangled his wrists, pushing himself up on the board and kicking it away with as much force as he could, sending himself flying forward straight toward his friend. Todoroki! Izuku screamed seconds before crashing into the bewildered teen, who'd barely had a chance to turn around before Izuku barreled into him, sending them both crashing to the floor. Todoroki was the first to recover, briefly checking Izuku was okay before standing up and running for the finish line, making a path of ice so he could move faster. Izuku tried to stand up too, only to find that one of his hands had been frozen to the floor. Izuku glared at the ice, using his other hand to try and break it. Luckily it wasn't too thick and he managed to free himself moments before the next people completed the first obstacles. Izuku skated after Todoroki, using the ice to gather momentum just as he had at the beginning of the race. The crowd roared as Todoroki crossed the finish line only 7 seconds before Izuku did. Mike yelled something about Izuku being one of his students, and Izuku felt tears in his eyes. He'd come second! He was second! It wasn't first, but he'd be happy to settle for second, especially since Todoroki had come first. He deserved more than Izuku did anyway. Speaking of Todoroki, the hero student was walking over to him, having only just recovered from running so fast. "Hey, Midoriya," Todoroki asked him as others began crossing the finish line too. "Are you okay? I never got the chance to properly ask earlier. I was too focused on winning." It's fine," Izuku quickly reassured, waving his hands. I really should be asking you. I crashed into you on purpose after all." "I'm okay. Probably just a few bruises," Todoroki reassured him just as Kirishima and Shinzo crossed the finish line. Together, Izuku's friends quickly made their way over. "You two were so manly!" Kirishima yelled. "That stunt at the end was amazing, Midori bro!" "Well done, Midoriya. And you, Todoroki. I'm glad one of us made a splash at least." Shinzo nodded his approval. "Don't worry, Shinzo." Izuku smiled, tearing up a little at the praise. "You'll be able to show it off later." Soon Mei joined them, grinning and telling Izuku how well her babies worked. Of course, that's what she focused on. Followed by Monoma, who eyed the two 1A students suspiciously as he stood with them, congratulating Izuku on getting second place and blatantly ignoring Todoroki. Izuku smiled, saying that they all did amazingly too. Slowly but steadily, people continued to finish the obstacle course, some in more questionable ways, like Mineta, who stuck his balls to Momo, who seemed absolutely disgusted and uncomfortable. Surely that was classed as sexual assault, right? Izuku didn't have time to dwell on that though, since Midnight had stepped back up onto the podium, ready to announce what would happen next. Chapter 27. Team 10 Million. The top 42 contestants from the obstacle course will be going through to the next event, Midnight announced once everyone had returned. Don't feel too bad if you didn't make it though. You'll still have a chance to shine later. Izuku smiled at the others. All his friends had made it through. That was good. The next event will be... Midnight smirked as she looked down at the group of 42 contestants in front of her, waiting for the board to stop spinning. This! Cavalry battles? Kaminari whined from near Izuku's little group. I'm so bad at those! It's just like the playground game. Soon you will be given 15 minutes to decide on your teams. For now you'll be assigned points based off on your placement in the last event. Going up from 32nd place were 5 points, and going up through by 5 points from there. So, So we'll have to steal people's points, and creating teams will be more difficult since we'll need to think about each other's points as well. Two croaked from the front of the crowd, looking at Mina before she was interrupted by Midnight pointing at her with her whip. "If you shut up, I'll finish explaining," she yelled. "You will be in teams of 2 to 4 people. Your rider will wear the headband displaying your team's points, and any captured headband from around their neck. If you lose your headband or your team crumbles, you'll be allowed to keep playing also." Izuku couldn't help but notice Midnight smirking at Todoroki as she paused. The boy himself looked pretty unsettled, if you were able to pick emotions out of the deadpan look he always wore. "First place will be worth 10 million points!" she yelled, snickering as every student's gaze locked onto Todoroki, who looked as though he may be about to crack under the social pressure of being the center of attention. "You may begin making your teams now. I suggest you get started." "Anyone with an objection to us being a team, raise your hand." Shinzo deadpanned, turning to Izuku, Kirishima and Todoroki, who still looked like his deadpan look was about to shatter. "I'm making a team with some of the 1B guys. Good luck, Team 10 million!" Monoma saluted, then before disappearing into the crowd. Todoroki sighed. "I doubt anyone else will be willing to team up with me, so I'll team with you guys." "Are you saying we're just the second choice?" Shinzo asked in a mock offense that Todoroki didn't seem to catch on to, seemingly thinking that he'd actually offended the Gen Ed student. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound like that. I simply meant that I'd prefer to find people with quirks that I was more familiar with and complemented my own." Todoroki explained. Izuku sighed. "Welp, you have us now," Izuku replied. "You're the only one with a powerful offensive quirk here, Todoroki." "I'm not using my fire," Todoroki huffed. "Yes, we know." Shinzo sighed. Todoroki had brought it up a good few times during their conversations at lunch. "But your eyes would be good for offense and defense," Izuku smiled, "and for maneuverability too. My roller skates will be pretty much useless to us here, but with your eyes for long-range defense, and Kirishima and Shinzo for short-range."
"All right, Mido bro. You're the strategist here, so what's our strategy?"
Kirishima interrupted. Izuku smiled. "I've got a plan."
"Time's up for our teams!"
Mike yelled over the speaker system.
"Everybody into your formations and get ready to begin! What do you think of our teams, Eraserhead?"
"There's an interesting mix. Some people seem to have gone for friendship over power, and others have stuck with classmates."
Aizawa sighed, obviously singling out Izuku's team and also obviously very bored.
"There's no telling what might happen."
"Awesome commentary! It's time to begin the cavalry battle!"
Izuku looked around the stadium determinedly. Their team had decided that he should be the rider, since he was small and quick, light enough to be easily carried, and small enough to dodge out of the way of attackers. Todoroki was on the right of their formation, meaning he could use his eyes without endangering his teammates. Kirishima was on the left, prepared to use his hardening to defend from others. He had admitted that he might not be so useful, but he will be good to defend against certain attacks. Shinzo was in the front, able to use his scarf for defense, along with his quirk, which he would use if they were out of options since he didn't want people to catch on before the final rounds. Kirishima and Todoroki were wearing one of Izuku's skates each. They hadn't thought about that it would be overly useful to them, but it was good to have as a last resort. They were all set, ready to go. It was about to begin. As soon as the event started, almost every team came rushing for them. Todoroki stamped on the ground, freezing the floor, which either got the team stuck or at least slowed them down and bought their team the time to get away, which they quickly did, retreating to a less busy area as most of the other teams started going for each other, deciding that it would be a better strategy to steal other headbands than go for the 10 million. Unfortunately, not every team was thinking that. Monoma was keeping his team away from them, going around and taunting people while gathering a growing collection of low-point headbands that currently had his team in 4th place. One of the teams that didn't give up on their point was Yaoyorozu's team, comprised of her, Iida, and Kaminari. They were a dangerous team, and they were already on the approach.
"Todoroki! Can you make an ice wall? We need to talk strategy!"
Izuku yelled as they approached. Todoroki nodded with a determined look on his face, dragging his hand forward, creating a barrier of ice between them and Yao Momo's team.
Okay. This'll have to be quick. We need to get rid of Kaminari first. We need to make sure he overuses his quirk. I don't know if the jets on my skates are going to be enough to get us off the ground, but if we get enough of a boost, we should stay up long enough to avoid the electricity. But we need to make sure he uses it," Izuku told them quickly.
"I can boost us forward with my ice."
Todoroki nodded quickly.
I can probably brainwash him into doing his power move,"
Shinzo suggested, but Izuku shook his head.
"No, we can't reveal your quirk like that. We need to get into an area with more teams. If everyone's coming at us, they'll use the indiscriminate move to stun them so they can focus on us,"
Izuku said firmly, and Shinzo nodded.
"You think that'll work?" Kirishima asked. "It seems risky, man."
"It's better than waiting behind this ice for them to come for us,"
Todoroki pointed out.
"It should work as long as we make sure they follow us."
Izuku nodded. "Yeah, Todoroki's right. So are we all in?"
Their team skirted around the ice barrier Todoroki had made, making sure to go out of bounds as they did so. Momo's team saw them almost instantly and began to charge for them. They didn't use Iida's quirk, yet, luckily, but they were still doing exactly as Izuku had predicted. Leading them into the midst of the fray hadn't been easy. Multiple teams were now going for them, though Yaoyorozu's team was definitely the most powerful. Team 10 million were being backed into a corner, holding out for Kaminari to use his quirk. Finally, as the moment came.
"Now, Kaminari!"
Momo called for their teammate, having just finished making a mechanism that would stop her and Iida from being shocked. Kaminari grinned, pulling the electricity to use to stun everyone within reach. "Now?" Todoroki asked quietly. Izuku shook his head.
"Timing has to be perfect."
Kaminari yelled the name of his move, the electricity traveling across the field.
"Now!"
Midoriya yelled.
"Hold on!"
All 4 of them held on to each other for dear life as Todoroki created a blast of ice which pushed them off of the ground just in time. Izuku activated the jets on the skates and Kirishima and Todoroki angled them so they were facing to the ground. As Izuku had expected, they didn't keep the team up in the air.
They were only built to increase speed, not to be used as a rocket boot, after all, especially when there was 4 people to support instead of 1. The electricity from Kaminari's blast settled over them, a static, not shocking them like it did to the other teams, but it made Todoroki's hair stick out at odd angles, and made Izuku's poof up even more than it already was. Quickly they were back on the ground, and Izuku deactivated the boots. One look at Momo's team showed them that their plan had worked. Kaminari had been brain-fried, and most of the other teams were stunned. Momo was now basically fully relying on Ida to hold her up while trying to keep Kaminari in position, while he tried to limp away. It would have been hilarious if they weren't trying to win a competition. The timer on the board showed that only 5 minutes had passed from the beginning of the event. They'd still have to survive for 10 more before they could let their guards down.
Next target is Ida. We just need to get Todoroki close enough to freeze his engines. Then they're as good as out,
Izuku said, leaning down to whisper to his team, who nodded.
What about Yaoyorozu though? She'll probably steal the million if we pass her,
Kirishima replied. Izuku frowned. He was right. If they just approached without a plan, Yaoyorozu would definitely snatch the points.
They seem to be struggling enough with the idiot over there, so we could just leave them be.
Izuku nodded after a second. I think that's the best idea. Let's just try and evade other teams for now. About 7 minutes had passed now, and there was only just under 3 minutes left. Izuku's team had ended up dodging and evading attacks from multiple people. Monoma's team had started helping them out by taking on the teams that were gaining on them now that they were in 2nd place on the board. 3rd and 4th spots were currently occupied by Mina's team, Mina, Zero, Tokoyami, and Tsuyu, and Yaoyorozu's team, who had somehow managed to keep their headbands. They already had a few they'd taken from coming after Izuku's team, even with Kaminari being dead weight. In the last 2 minutes, teams with less or no points started coming after them, hoping for a chance. Mineta and Joshi had attempted to steal their headband, only for Shinzo to unceremoniously wrap him up in his capture scarf and leave him unable to do anything. Multiple teams had ended up iced to the floor, and one team, Ochiro, Aoyama, and a couple others from 1B, ended up brainwashed by Shinzo to go after other teams. He'd done it a little reluctantly, but it ended up being the only option. In the last 30 seconds, Yaoyorozu's team struck yet again. Her team had lost their headbands and dropped multiple ranks on the board, now ranking 6th. Ida ended up using a special move that he'd been working on without the class's knowledge, making them go incredibly fast. Too fast for Izuku to dodge in time. Their plan was a desperate one too. Momo had grabbed blindly as they went past instead of a calculated swipe, so she'd ended up with a handful of the few headbands that had accumulated on Izuku's shoulder rather than the one around his forehead. Team Yaoyorozu had celebrated before realizing that the 2 headbands only put them back into 4th place. As her team realized this, they turned to take another strike at Midoriya's team, but Ida's engines were busted and Kaminari was deadweight, so there wasn't much they could do before.
And time's up!
Mike yelled, whacking the surface in front of him.
Let's take a look at the scores!
Mike proceeded to announce the scores with the odd comment in between and how he hadn't expected a team to go so well. Midoriya's team were in 1st, having miraculously managed to keep hold of the 10 million points. 10th band for the entire round. In 2nd was Monoma's team, who'd gone round picking up smaller points in the background, not going for the million once. Mina's team was third. They'd only gone for the million right at the end after getting enough headbands to feel safe. They'd ended up frozen to the ground, but luckily Mina's acid got them out, and they managed to protect their horde until the end. Fourth was Yaoyorozu's team, who looked thoroughly disappointed with their failure to take the 10 million. Well, Ida and Yaoyorozu did. Kaminari was giving everyone a thumbs up and making a dopey, happy face with the accompanying noises, so everyone assumed he was alright. Now
we'll have an hour lunch break,
Mike announced.
Come on, Razorhead, let's go get food. I'm starving.
Izuku's team quickly let him down from their shoulders before happily congratulating each other. Mama came over and told them that they did amazingly well, and they returned the favor before the girl headed off to lunch, dragging Kaminari behind her. Todoroki and Kirishima gave Izuku back his skates before Todoroki took a step back and Kirishima grinned at them.
We should probably head to the cafeteria too,
Kirishima said.
We need energy for the final event.
Actually, Midoriya, could I talk to you before we go to the lunch?
Todoroki asked, giving Izuku a look that clearly said that this was important. Todoroki? Yeah, sure. You guys go on ahead. We'll be there soon. Izuku smiled, waving Shinzo and Kirishima off before turning to Todoroki, who led him off to the side over a secluded hallway. Hey, what's this about? Midoriya asked, standing in the hallway leading towards the side entrance.
There's something I've been wondering if I should tell you about. Recently, it's about why I don't use my fire.
A secret for a secret? Izuku asked. Todoroki's eyes widened momentarily.
Huh?
You tell me your secret and I'll tell you one as well. It's like an exchange. I think it's supposed to make it easier to trust someone.
Oh, well then. Sure, we can do that,
Todoroki said before sighing.
Midoriya, have you ever heard about quirk marriages?
Chapter 28. Little Talks, Big Revelations. Izuku listened as Todoroki told his story. He watched silently while his friend explained what Endeavor had done to him and his mother, that the hero had driven her to pour boiling water onto his face. By the time Todoroki fell silent, Izuku realized he was crying silent tears and quickly moved to wipe them away.
Did I make you cry?
Todoroki asked him after a second, noticing the glint of tears on Izuku's face. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just... Izuku mumbled. That was a lot to take him.
I apologize.
Maybe I shouldn't have... No, it's fine! Izuku yelped. I'm glad you told me, Todoroki. Wow, I knew Endeavor was a terrible hero, but I never thought he'd be doing something like that. Todoroki offered him nothing more than a single nod of his head, and they lapsed into an uncomfortable silence that lasted a few moments too long. Hey, I guess it's my turn now, huh? Izuku said, trying to bring back a happier atmosphere after that revelation. When Todoroki nodded silently again, Izuku continued. You remember the first time we talked and I said about taking down Endeavor's hero career?
You said that it wasn't every day you met someone with valuable information to take down someone's hero career. Why? Todoroki asked, confused about where this was going.
Well, there's probably a chance that I could theoretically do that? Izuku phrased it like a question, offering Todoroki a nervous smile, though he still looked confused.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Todoroki asked him before glaring suspiciously.
Are you a villain?
No! Of course not! Izuku yelped, raising his hands in front of him. I'd never do something villainous, I swear. I have a big enough platform to theoretically bring down Endeavor's hero career. I considered doing it before, actually, but when I did a video on him, I decided to not to. Now that I know that what he did to you, though, well, let's just say that with your word, I have more than enough evidence. The slight tilt of Todoroki's head on his frown, a little more intense than it usually was, showed how Todoroki was obviously trying to put together the pieces of what Izuku was saying. Izuku waited for him to get there, but eventually Todoroki sighed.
I think I'm missing something here.
Todoroki told him after a second, and Izuku gave him an embarrassed laugh. I am Ryoko Analysis, and I want to take down your father's hero career. He decided to simply put the point straight, saying exactly what he meant to say right to Todoroki's face. Todoroki's eyes widened momentarily, his mouth forming a small surprised O shape, which lasted only moments before it disappeared back into the deadpan look.
You're serious?
Todoroki asked him, his tone suggesting, despite the neutral look on his face, that he wasn't sure whether he could believe Midoriya. Midoriya smiled before turning to walk away. Now we should get lunch?
Yeah. Does anyone else know this?
Todoroki asked him before he could get far. Shinzo, Kirishima, Aizawa, and Netsu. Oh, and my mom! But that's kinda a given. Izuku gave the same nervous laugh again. Shinzo and Kirishima are two of the admins on my Discord server.
Right, okay, let's go then.
Todoroki said before heading out of the hallway, followed quickly by Izuku, who jogged after him so they could walk side by side. They never noticed the blonde eavesdropping on the conversation from the other end of the hall. Katsuki stood with his back to the wall, trying to silence his breathing. He couldn't believe his ears. First, half and half spilling his life story to the damn nerd. As much as Katsuki didn't like the Ice Prince, he couldn't deny that Endeavor was a complete asshole. Katsuki decided, in the moments after hearing all that shit, that he was absolutely didn't want to be like that. He knew he was angry. He knew he probably had a few issues. He knew that if he kept trying to blow up his problems, he wouldn't get anywhere. Hell, now he was further from his goal than he was to begin with. He couldn't be a hero if he was stuck in Gannett after all. He wasn't even supposed to be here. He was lucky enough to have been able to buy himself a ticket to watch the festival. It had taken almost all the money he had saved. Tickets to the events were way too fucking expensive. Katsuki could have just gone to buy lunch from the multitude of stalls set up in the business course students. Maybe he should have, but he'd seen Icy Hot and Deco sneaking off and decided on a whim to follow them. And so he'd found out Todoroki's sob story, and something that was so glaringly obvious now that he knew. Even if it was obvious, Even if he cursed himself out as he walked back to the stands, Katsuki almost wished he didn't know. Deku was Ryoku. Now that Katsuki knew, it seemed obvious. The animated way he rambled was so familiar, even if he hadn't seen it in years. Was that his fault? The way his eyes lit up behind the mask when he mentioned a hero he was especially fond of. The way he'd smiled wildly. Even his voice was the same, though Katsuki hadn't heard him talk with such a confidence since before he was diagnosed quirkless. Katsuki almost paled at the thought. Deku hadn't been as confident as he was in his YouTube videos since they were 4 years old. Then another realization hit him. It was the reason Ryoku disappeared for almost 8 weeks. He'd almost killed Deku. The reality of that only really set in. Then he'd made it so that Deku couldn't make videos for over 2 months. He'd asked the person he almost killed if he could still be a hero. He'd asked the person he'd bullied for 10 years if he could still make it into the top hero school in the country, and he'd said that he could. He was no better than Endeavor. The blonde felt like screaming as he paid for lunch, his body on autopilot as he was lost in thought. He wondered if things could have been different, if he'd been able to look past the fact that Izuku was quirkless. But no, even before that, memories flashed through his mind. All Deku had ever wanted to do was help since they first met. He was kind and pure, and Katsuki decided even before he'd been diagnosed quirkless that he was small and weak and useless. But he was he? Deku had helped so many people all across the world without even getting into the hero course. Deku was the reason Katsuki had trained so hard for the entrance exams. Deku was the reason his former classmates knew better ways to use their quirks, and the reason Creation Girl had a costume that wasn't so horrendously sexual. Deku had even helped Katsuki with his quirk, albeit unknowingly. He'd made a video on explosion quirks when Katsuki had asked for it. The fact that his quirks was blacklisted in the server made so much sense now. It left a bitter taste in his mouth and a twisting feeling in his gut that he wasn't used to. The video had been choppy and hesitant compared to his others, but that only made sense considering. Fuck! He was even relying on Deku to get into the hero course so he'd be able to join Gennett, hopefully get another chance at heroics next year, though it seemed like it would be impossible now. Katsuki knew as he took his seat back in the now considerably more empty stands. There was a good half an hour to go before the final event started, but he hadn't felt like finding somewhere else to go. That he had a lot to learn. Maybe the first step would be to stop calling him Deku, but it had been so long now that it felt wrong calling him anything else. Yeah, Katsuki had a lot to think about. Chapter 29. And so begins the final round. Hey guys! Izuku slid into his seat next to Shinzo at their lunch table as Todoroki sat across from him then, next to Kirishima.
So, are you two ready for the final round?
Kirishima asked them as soon as they were in their seats.
I can't believe we made it this far.
I guess I'm a little nervous. I really don't know how I got this far since, I don't have a quirk and all. Midoriya mumbled. I guess I'm just worried about how people will take it, I guess, since they'll probably announce our quirks and all.
Yeah, but you're one of the smartest people I know,
Kirishima yelled, banging his fists on the table and making all the trays rattle.
It doesn't matter if you're quirkless.
Besides, you still have the support gear and the training from Eraserhead. You'll be fine, Midoriya.
Shinzo replied. I guess you're right. Also Izuku shot a glance at Todoroki, who looked up from his soba when the other two followed his gaze. I told Todoroki about, Dad.
Oh, really? Awesome, dude! You can be part of the crew now!
Kirishima grinned, before leaning forward.
Are you on the Discord server?
Yes. My name is Hot and Cold. I requested the video on Endeavor.
Todoroki replied, and Izuku snorted, then slapped a hand over his mouth when everyone at the table looked at him. It really should have... I should have realized that it was you. Izuku said after recovering. Is it the song?
The song?
Todoroki asked after a second, looking more confused than any of the four had ever seen him.
Oh my god, he doesn't know it! Shinzo, please!
Izuku looked at his friend, hoping that he'd understand.
For once, I'm glad my dad likes English pop music, because it means I know what you're talking about.
Shinzo nodded.
We'll force you to listen to it after the festival.
Right. Speaking of which, we should probably be heading back now,
Kirishima cut in.
Time's almost up.
All right, the final round! Izuku yelped, quickly finishing his lunch. Kirishima grinned at them while he waited, having already finished his lunch, before they began heading back to the stadium together.
Yo, Shinzo! Meet bro! Do you guys want to come sit with me and Todobro in the 1A booth during the final matches?
Kirishima asked the pair as they made their way back to the stadium after lunch. Is that allowed? Izuku asked, glancing up at Kirishima.
You'll be in 1A soon anyway, won't you? Besides, Midobro is basically an adopted member of our class, and I don't think Aizawa-sensei cares.
Shinzo shrugged. Good enough for me.
We'll be there, Izuku replied as they gathered in front of the platform, waiting for midnight to announce what the final round would be.
I'm gonna die,
Izuku whined as Midnight announced that it would be an all-out quark battle.
You'll be fine, Midoriya.
Todoroki tried to reassure him.
Yeah, sure, Mr. Most Powerful Quark in 1A, Midoriya mumbled. I think that honor goes to Yogozu,
Todoroki countered. Izuku rolled his eyes. Second best then, at least you have a quirk.
You don't need a quirk to be powerful, Midoriya.
Shinzo butted into the conversation.
You are one of the best analysts I know, and you still have the support equipment.
Yeah, sure, Izuku mumbled before jumping when Midnight started talking again. Since there was an odd number in the last round, we'll be bringing up the rider from the 5th place team. Tetsu! Midnight called, earning a cheer from the metal boy and his team. Now you will all draw lots to decide your matches before we begin the games for those who didn't make it this far. Those of you competing in the final round are welcome to participate, but I'm sure you'll want to save your stamina. Midnight cheered before grabbing a box and climbing off the podium to head to Todoroki and the others from the winning team. And here's the bracket for the final round. Now you'll get some time to prepare for your matches while we have the games for those who didn't make it, Midnight announced, after the lots had been drawn, gesturing to the screen behind him. Izuku felt his worry disappear as he saw who he'd be up against. He almost laughed. His first match was against Monoma.
That's probably the best matchup I could have hoped for, Midoriya said. It'll be a quirkless fight, except I have support items and he doesn't. God damn it, Midoriya! Why did it have to be you?
The 1B student yelled.
This is rigged!
Sorry, Monoma.
I'm against the metal guy,
Kirishima yelled.
You're one to talk about this being rigged. Our quirks are literally the same.
Who the hell is Kurohiro?
Shinzo asked, glaring at the board. He's in 1B. He has a quirk that lets him merge with darkness, and it's pretty cool, Midoriya supplied. Maybe we should all strategize together. I can help you guys with your matches.
Is that fair?
Kirishima asked.
Yeah, that's not fair. He knows everything about our quirks, Monoma yelled. You can't help 1A, Midoriya. I thought you were on our side.
They're my friends, Monoma, and Shinzo isn't even in 1A. But I guess it might not be fair if I give them an advantage, but there's no rules against it. I'd help you too if you weren't fighting me.
Monoma scowled before turning away. Well, if I'm go and tell them everything I know about you guys.
Okay, dude. See you later then, I guess,
Kirishima said, watching as Monoma sauntered away.
He really doesn't like us, does he?
I wouldn't take it personally, Midoriya waved him off. So do you guys want help for your rounds? For our first match of the tournament, we have Izuku Midoriya, who passed the General Studies exam with flying colors, and Nieto Monoma from the Hero course with a powerful copy quirk. Midoriya clenched his fists in determination as fire lit off in the corners of the cement platform where their match would take place. He walked up the stairs with a determined look on his face and took his place across from Monoma, who looked equally as determined. "Begin!" Midnight called, cracking her whip to begin the match. Monoma made the first move, rushing forward in an attempt to get Midoriya out early using the element of surprise. Midoriya pulled the smoke goggles that had been resting on the top of his head before throwing a smoke grenade at Monoma's feet, engulfing the boy in smoke and allowing Midoriya to use his skates to move away from the boundaries before making his next move. After Midoriya threw the smoke bomb, the match was doomed for Monoma. The blonde was stuck in a cloud of thick smoke, left stumbling around trying to find his way and also trying not to move since he was a little too close to the boundaries for comfort. He was trying to regain his sense of direction when his arm was grabbed and then he was spinning. Spinning? Midoriya knew that using his skates to gain enough momentum to throw Monoma out of bounds was unnecessary, but he needed to do this quickly and would rather not fight Monoma head on since Monoma probably had more combat training than he did from being part of the hero course. Getting this over with quickly was probably the best strategy. So with that logic, Izuku used the fact that Monoma was disoriented by the smoke to grab him by the arm and used the jets on his skates to spin around a few times, gathering enough momentum to lift Monoma off the floor and fling him out of bounds, simultaneously blowing all the smoke away. "Monoma is out of bounds!" Midnight yelled as the smoke cleared. "Midoriya advances to the next round!" Hey, are you okay?" Midoriya asked Monoma as robots loaded him onto a stretcher. "Huh? Oh, Midoriya!" Monoma said. He'd been winded by the landing and hadn't yet properly recovered. "I'm fine. Well done. I can't believe you won so easily." Midoriya laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, me neither. Just don't lose the festival, okay? It'll make me look bad."
"Hey dude, you did amazing out there!"
Kirishima called as soon as Midoriya got to the 1A booth, quickly scanning the seats to find Shinzo and Kirishima already sat at the front waiting for him. Todoroki must have already left to prepare for his match. He was up next after all. "I didn't do much, really." "Nonsense, Midoriya! You did well!" Yaoyorozu congratulated him.
"Yeah, man! You two were super cool!"
The two of the boys, Midoriya and Sero, leaned over the back of their chairs to tell him. Midoriya found himself smiling. "Thanks, guys!" Chapter 30. The Conspiracy Crew and the Matches.
"How do you think the match will go, Midori bro?"
Kirishima asked as they waited for President Mike to announce the next match. "Well, Todoroki's quirk is offensive and Tsubaraba's quirk is mainly defensive, so it really depends on how they use them. But I think Todoroki will win. Tsubaraba's quirk is too small scale for Todoroki's massive ice attacks."
"I guess we'll have to see,"
Shinzo said as the two opponents walked up to the area. The fight was over in a few moments. Izuku barely managed to pull Shinzo and Kirishima back before the front of the 1A booth was covered in ice. They could only guess what was happening from the muffled yells of President Mike and the glacier that Todoroki had won. "Oof! To the 1B guy, though," Kaminari said behind them. Sero nodded in response. "Glad that wasn't me down there." It's freezing!" The girl with pink cheeks, Uraraka, Todoroki called her, said as she wrapped her arms around herself. "That was a little overboard, don't you think?" "Maybe," Midoriya said thoughtfully. He looked sad. I wonder what happened. Was he upset when he was here?
"He didn't seem like he was in a bad mood, though,"
Ida told him.
"He was acting like himself."
"Interesting. Well, Shinzo, it's your match next, right?" Izuku turned to his purple-haired friend, who nodded. "Good luck! I think he would have an advantage on this one. Kurohiro doesn't really have a way to use his quirk in the arena."
"Yeah, right. I got this."
Shinzo nodded.
"I'll see you guys after I win."
Shinzo got up and headed out of the 1A booth after Kirishima and Izuku wished him good luck, and while he was gone, the ice was finally melted by Todoroki himself, and the stage was made ready for the next match. As Todoroki walked away, Izuku noticed the look on his face again. Something had happened between him leaving 1A and the beginning of his match. and Izuku had a few guesses as to what. After the sports festival, he was definitely bringing Endeavor down. He'd just wait. Shinzo's match was over quickly too, and even more uneventful than Midoriya's match against Monoma. It was obvious that Mike was getting bored of the short matches with nothing to comment on, but Izuku knew it would get better in the next round, especially since his next fight was against Todoroki, which frankly was something he didn't even want to think about. Izuku didn't plan on getting frozen in a giant glacier like Tsubaraba was, but if Todoroki decided to take that approach again, well, let's just say Izuku didn't really have a way to avoid it without a quirk. Hopefully his skates would help him avoid smaller blasts of ice. Shinzo's match was over quickly. Kuroiru had no way to use his quirk like Izuku had predicted, and he wouldn't have gotten any chance anyway. Shinzo had brainwashed him and had him walk out of bounds right at the beginning anyway. It was only when the match was almost up that Todoroki returned to the booth, sitting down next to Kirishima silently, ignoring Kaminagi's pestering over his massive attack in his round. Izuku gave him a worried look as Shinzo was announced the winner, before cheering loudly for his friend with the rest of the crowd. Hey Todoroki, are you okay? Did something happen before your match? Izuku asked him quietly. You look upset, and the glacier was, well,
excessive, I know. Todoroki replied solemnly, looking at the ground. I was angry. My father talked to me before my match. Izuku nodded. That was all Todoroki had to say to confirm Izuku's suspicion that Endeavor had something to do with it. Who do you think will win this match? Ida or Zero? Izuku asked him, deciding to try and distract him from whatever Endeavor had said. Aren't you the analyst? Todoroki asked. Yeah, but a second opinion is always helpful, Izuku said. Plus, a conspiracy theorist is usually good at analysis, right? Conspiracy theorist? Todoroki asked him, a question that was quickly echoed by Kirishima and Kaminari. I've seen some of the theories you come up with on the server. You can't tell me you're not a conspiracy theorist. Todoroki sighed in defeat. Okay, maybe I have a few theories. Anyway, I think Ida will win unless Zero can tape his engines, but I think Ida can outrun Zero's tape. Agreed! Izuku said happily. I think Ida's speed is fast enough, especially since Zero can't change the direction of his tape after he shoots it. Ida could even grab Zero's tape and use it to his advantage by swinging Zero out of bounds like I did with Monoma. Yeah, I appreciated that, by the way, said the blonde, who popped his head over the barrier between their booth. And I can't believe our resident Elsa is a conspiracy theorist. I'd never have guessed. Who's Elsa? Todoroki said, furrowing his brows in confusion before looking back up at Monoma. If you want to discuss conspiracies, I'd be happy to share. Izuku quickly pulled out his notebook and added, "Watch Frozen" to the back page, which currently contained a list of all the things he had to do involving Todoroki, as he and Monoma began discussing some conspiracy about Netsu being the actual manifestation of the god of hell or something. Shinzo got back halfway through the conversation and sat down next to Izuku, giving him a questioning look about Todoroki and Monoma, to which Izuku just shrugged before looking back at the arena where the match had just started. Tuning them out and turning his attention back to the match, Izuku watched as Ida kicked Zero in the stomach.
That looked like it hurt and sent him flying out of bounds, too winded to use his quirk to save himself. It happened just as we predicted, Izuku observed. Todoroki nodded before looking over at Shinzo. Hey, Monoma, what do you think about Shinzo being Aizawa's secret love child? Shinzo silently choked on his own breath, and Izuku had to pat him on the back until he could breathe again, while Todoroki and Monoma launched back into conversation, and Izuku worried a little about whether he'd started something. The next match, Tokoyami vs. Yaoyorozu, went just as well as a bunch of seagulls fighting over a goldfish might go. Terribly, for Yaoyorozu at least. Izuku had predicted that she'd win, but she'd frozen up and been overwhelmed by Dark Shadow's attacks and ended up out of bounds. Izuku kind of wished he'd helped her because that defeat must have been a blow to her confidence. Have you seen them together? Because I have, and they basically look like father and son, Monoma said. And Shinzo has a capture scarf, just like Aizawa-sensei. I know the resemblance is definitely too obvious to ignore, plus Aizawa-sensei has a soft spot for Midoriya, who's Shinzo's best friend. Coincidence? I think not. Will you two shut up? I'm trying to watch the match, Shinzo said, his tone bored. He sounded like Aizawa-sensei. If only they knew. The next match wasn't much to look at. Denki went all out with his quirk and knocked the poor 1B student unconscious. He'd left himself in his dumb state, but he was still able to move on, so he won the match, interestingly. Izuku wasn't sure whether he'd be able to participate in the next one. Hopefully Recovery Girl would be able to get him back to himself before then. The next match, Asui vs. Mina, was probably the first match of the day that actually had everyone on the edge of their seat. It lasted long enough for Mike to finally get some good commentary, since both girls managed to keep the fight going for a significant amount of time. Both of them had good evasive techniques. Asui, she'd insisted Izuku on calling her too, but he was still having a little trouble with that, could jump far, and Mina could skate quickly on her acid, but eventually Mina managed to take Asui down. Izuku figured it was because Asui's frog quirk was better suited to natural terrain, where there were walls for her to stick to and advantage points to use her long tongue properly, which she didn't have for that fight. It's my turn, I guess, Kikishima sighed. They hadn't managed to come up with a strategy for him to beat Tetsu since their quirks were almost exactly the same, so Izuku just told him to try and outlast the 1B student. It wasn't much of a strategy, but it was the best they had. The fight had been exhausting to watch. It lasted a good 15 minutes of back and forth, neither of them managing to take down the other with their almost identical quirks. In the end, they both passed out and the match ended in a draw. Well, that was anticlimactic, Todoroki observed. Well, I guess I'll be down for our next match, Izuku said. He'd been trying not to think about it, and how he had to think of some way to beat his friend. Yeah.
Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience for the wait. I have been so busy in the last month because one of our dogs, Rosie, had her puppies, as I shared in Eleanor Elizabeth's Discord server. And thank you so much for following me. Oh my god, this is so cool. Also, Red Overlord and Ella, you're both so amazing. I love you. Anyways, I will try to pick up the pace again
Still, my sleeping schedule is so skewed from when I had to take over to take care of the babies during the night, but now they sleep through the night and I'm so glad. There will certainly be more pictures in maybe some, what is it called in English? Community posts, that was it. In community posts and the server of Eleanor Elizabeth. Go follow them. They did so many awesome fan fiction readings and podfics. Same thing, but still, it's so awesome. And hey, if you have any wishes for fan fictions that I should read, any fandom, then tell me in the comments. I love you guys, gals, non-binary pals. Just, no matter what your sexuality or identification is, I love you. And have a nice evening. See you next time with the next 5 chapters.